Alright, now that we're kind of burning our way down to the last episode of The Ultimate Fighter, we have tops 4 shows left, and I think they'll do 2 semifinals a show, but that's just my thoughts. That would be 2 more episodes. Okay, well, first up, I was pretty disappointed with some of the fighters that were cast, and also pretty disappointed with some of the fighters that made it into the house by what you would call kind of just bad matchups. When they did it, I don't know how they make the matchups. It could be entirely random, or it could be actually matched up. But you had guys like, examples would be Ido Parente, Joe Duarte, even to a lesser extent, Napoleon Dog, Aguilar. I think it was Jose Aguilar, right? I might have the first name wrong. We're all better than some of the guys that got in the house. Specifically, I'm thinking of Rolly Delgado, although he didn't actually make it in the house. Maybe George Group, and probably better than John Polakowski. The other 5 were pretty good. Kaplan, Shane Nelson, and so on. They were actually fairly solid fighters. And the same thing happened to 205 with, like, originally Kyle Kingsbury being out because he fought Ryan Bader. And, of course, we lost Karen Gregorian to the broken nose, and we would have lost Elliot Marshall. They, again, messed up 2 pretty solid fighters, and sometimes I don't get that, because they did that in the first season, too, when they matched up Mike Morello, or not the first season, but last season, when they did the Fight into the House. They did it with Gerald Harris and Mike Morello, and they did it with Steve Burns. To a lesser extent, because Amir Sadala was an unknown quantity, but he was a decently recognized Sambo fighter and also a champion kickboxer. So, probably not the best way to go. And you had some weaker fighters fight against each other. Or at least weaker in my opinion. Jules Bruchet making it into the house. Yeah, that was bad. As for the fights, pretty much I pretty much got everything right there, which is pretty cool. Except I had Polakowski beating Group, because I thought Polakowski would be able to stop the takedown. You live and learn. We have the semifinal matchups at 205. We have Krzysztof Sosinski versus Vinicius Malahegas. Krzysztof is one of the more well-rounded fighters at 205. He can strike, he can wrestle, he can grapple. I would say him and Elliot Marshall are the 2 like mixed martial artists, like true mixed martial artists at this point in their career in the group. He's fighting Vinny, who's pretty much all ground, but he has good reach on the feet, and he can use that to his advantage. He's learning how to use that to his advantage. If he goes to the ground, obviously Vinny has a decided advantage. He's world class. He's a champion grappler, black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And Krzysztof is maybe a purple belt. If I were to get, I don't know if he even has a belt. But if I were to guess by his ground skills, I'd say purple, maybe brown. Probably purple. He submitted Kyle Kingsbury relatively easy, and then got up and said, I have Jiu-Jitsu too. But unfortunately, Kyle Kingsbury has no Jiu-Jitsu, and he knocked out Mike Stewart to get into the house. If I got that name wrong, I'm sorry. It was a Stewart, I'm pretty sure it was Mike. Vinicius Malahegas beat Lance Evans when Lance Evans got hurt. The younger brother of Rashad Evans, of course. And then he beat Jules Bruce, who was he's the worst fighter in the house. So both have had pretty easy paths to get here. I'm going to go with Krzysztof, because he should be able to win the fight on the feet, and I think he should be able to keep a large portion of it on the feet. And from what we all reports from Team Quest back in the day, Krzysztof used to manhandle Vinny. And additionally, Team Quest has kept Krzysztof after The Ultimate Fighter and Vinny is gone, so that might say something, I don't know. Then we have Ryan Bader versus Elliot Marshall. Bader is not as good of a striker and not as good of a grappler as Elliot, but he is a better wrestler. We know that wrestling in the UFC is a key component. If you have the wrestling, you can possibly win a fight against a guy who is a lot better than you at everything else, because you can control the fight. Bader's path to the house came by submitting Kyle Kingsbury and knocking out Tom Lawler, who are both pretty solid fighters, actually. As for Elliot Marshall, he had that war that he lost to Karen Gregorian. I'm one of the many who believe he won that fight. He had to come back in when Antoine Britt was injured. And he beat Shane Prim in the quarterfinals. So they both have had a little bit more of a tougher road than the other 2. I see Bader probably taking this by decision. I'm not sure how the Kristoff wins the other fight, by the way, other than I'm going to go with a TKO or a KO, maybe in the second round. Bader possibly wins this fight because Conor Gregorian managed to not get subbed by Elliot Marshall, and I don't think he's the top grappler that Ryan Bader is. I think Bader can take down Elliot basically at will, and he can hang in there on the feet. So I see Ryan Bader versus Sozinski in the finals. Next up, we have George Roop versus Felipe Nover, which is a steamroll. Nover should take this fight pretty easily. He's beaten Joe Duarte and Dave Kaplan, which is probably the hardest path to get to this point of anyone, even though he made relatively short work of both of them. I mean, those were two very quality fighters, although Dave Kaplan is delusional. As for George Roop, he beat Rolly Delgado and John Polkowski, who were two of the weaker fighters in the house and possibly overall. Well, maybe not. There were some pretty bad lightweights, but still. I easily give it to Nover. First round, TKO. Bam. And the other one, we have Junie Alan Browning versus Efren Escudero. Escudero is the better wrestler. Junie's the better striker in theory, although Junie's striking against Rolly Delgado did not look like anything special. But he did look pretty good against Aguilar. Let's get into the house. Additionally, of course, Efren Escudero went through Ido Parente, who is a very solid fighter, and Shane Nelson, who's a very solid fighter. So he's had the harder path, that's for sure. I'm taking Efren via submission because Junie, he doesn't learn from his mistakes and gets caught in submissions a lot, and I think Efren can take him down because apparently before the show they did a little competing for takedowns, and I think he did. So Escudero versus Nover in an all Nogueira final. So Nogueira is down 5-3 right now, but I got all three of his fighters winning, and only one of Mir's fighters. Side note, Mir coming off as a bit of a douchebag this season with his, I'm 200 times the athlete of Nogueira, and I came close to beating him at a sport that he plays. The whole big deal was that Nogueira was like one of the only Brazilians never to play soccer, so go figure. Just not terribly cool. Also, the coach's challenge had been interesting because every time it's set up basically for one to kind of hustle. Nogueira never played soccer. Pulver beating Penn at Matt Serra wasn't a bowler. Matt Hughes was, and Matt Serra won. Let's not forget Ken Shamrock completely hustling Tito Ortiz in the pool game, and Jens Pulver coming up with the surprising victory in ping pong. Do I have anything else to say about the season? Junie Alan Browning, certifiable nut job. Shane Nelson, very insecure with his sexuality, in my opinion. Those were my two big annoying fighters of the season, although they deserved to be there because they were both, by the standards of who they picked, relatively talented fighters. Moving on, for those of you who don't know, I made a mixed martial arts sim back in college. It's pretty accurate because, I mean, if you look at MMA Playground, it has somewhere around a 75% winning percentage. So it's done pretty well because I actually made an account for it and it does predictions, which is pretty neat. Anyways, I used to do something called the TCA, which was a Team Combat Association, or something like that. Total Combat or Team Combat, I can't remember what it stood for. I'll probably come up with a new name. It was a team-based thing, kind of like the IFL, but it had no restrictions. Like, it had Fedor, it had BJ Penn, it had Machida, etc. You could pick from any fighter. And there was a draft. And I'm thinking of starting it up again. The team format would be you would have one heavyweight, one light heavyweight, one middleweight, one welterweight, lightweight, featherweight, and bantamweight. So 7. So it's a best of 7. And if a fighter gets injured, because there will be injuries, you will have to replace him at least for the duration of his injury. Fights will be 2 months game time apart. So if a guy goes through unhurt, he should be more or less ready for the next fight. If you want a team in it, and it is fun. I mean, you can ask Ms. 2003K, Chris the Archangel, Phantom UFC Fan Chase. They all had a fair amount of fun doing it, and they're invited to join. I will sort of reserve a spot for them, but they do have to act kind of soon and get back to me about whether they want in. Not sure how many teams they'll have, but probably no more than 8, or Well, no, we have 7 weight classes, so let's go with 14 teams. Okay, so later.